A woman who thought she was a vampire from the movie Twilight has escaped jail.
Vampires have long fascinated people, but the term vampire wasn't officially used in the English language until 1732. These mythical creatures have been part of many cultures' folklore for centuries, often associated with mysterious deaths and causing fear and confusion. While modern medicine has replaced vampire beliefs as explanations for unexplained deaths, sightings and encounters still say the opposite thing. Keep watching to learn more about these vampires, whether they were real or all these stories are fictional. Here are 20 terrifying people who claimed to be vampires in their lives. Number 1. Leah Benninghoff and Arrow Draven. These two are what you might call modern-day vampires. Yes, they actually drink blood and even eat raw meat. Draven has had a fascination with blood-sucking since he was a kid. If someone got a cut at school, he'd be the first one there trying to help in his own unique way. It can be tough being different, especially when you're drawn to the night, like Draven. But on one fine day, he decided to give online dating a shot and found Leah. She was surprised when he told her he was a vampire, but she took it in stride. After dating for a few weeks, Leah wanted to join Draven in his vampire lifestyle. Converting wasn't too complicated. Draven cut himself, and Leah drank from the wound. She said it made her feel incredibly powerful. And now, these two lovebirds are planning to tie the knot. Any guesses on the date? Yep, you got it. They're getting married on Halloween. The couple has decided to tie the knot at 3 a.m., which is a witching hour, but there's a potential hurdle for this optimistic duo, explaining Arrow and Leah's newfound thirst for blood to their in-laws, who have no idea. Number 2. Megan Fox and Machine Gun Kelly. Recently, this celebrity couple shared about their blood-drinking habit, and even though they didn't exactly claim to be vampires, fans are kinda sure that they might just be acting like them. In a recent issue of Glamour UK, the 35-year-old actress opened up about their unique ritual. She explained that while she approaches it with control and purpose, MMGK is more spontaneous, even willing to cut his chest open with broken glass. This isn't the first time they've been open about using blood to celebrate their love. When they got engaged, they drank each other's blood. Despite the unconventional ritual, Megan emphasizes the importance of selflessness and unconditional love in their relationship. As for their wedding day, whether blood will play a role remains to be seen. However, sources say they're deeply in love and eager to tie the knot. Number 3. Auguste Delagrange. In a quite different tale, the state of Louisiana was gripped by fear due to a series of gruesome murders. Victims were found dismembered in their homes, with little blood at the scene. Police efforts failed, leading to rumors of a vampire culprit. Local Catholics sought help from Father Henry John Tay, who collaborated with voodoo priest Moses Amachan to hunt the vampire. Mapping the crimes revealed a pattern along the train line, suggesting the culprit might work for the railway. At a monitored station, they identified Auguste Delagrange, suspected to be the head vampire. The two men confronted Grange in an isolated shack, where Father Tay ended the reign of terror with a wooden stake to the heart. Father Tay recalls that Grange made no noise, only widening his eyes and staring into the priest's face before passing away. Grange, responsible for over 40 deaths, now rests as a skeleton on display at the Vampire Museum, situated on the outskirts of the French Quarter in New Orleans. Number 4. Arnold Paole. Arnold Paole was a soldier in the Austrian army. The story begins after he returns from the battle in the spring of 1727. He was residing in Meduenia, a Serbian village. While in his hometown, he built himself a home and married. It is believed that he told his wife that he feared his life would be snatched prematurely. While in Greece, he reportedly told his wife and others that he had met an undead or vampire. This part of the narrative is a little hazy because some claim he battled the vampire and the vampire bit him just before he killed it, while others say a vampire had come to haunt him, so he went to its tomb and burned its corpse, because that was customary at the time. Following this, he resigned from the service and returned to his hometown of Meduenia. After he came home, he resumed working on his farm. One day, he fell from a high height and fell unconscious. Unfortunately, he died of his injuries a few days later. Strange incidents began to occur following his burial, and because Paole had previously informed others about his vampire experiences, accusations began to arise that he was connected to the weird events. Some of the reported happenings were Paole showing up at people's houses, people sighting him about town, and people ending up dead with their blood sucked out of them. Officers were ordered to exhume Paole's body 40 days after his burial to determine whether he was responsible for these bizarre happenings. When they unburied him, they discovered that his body was still very fresh, with a small quantity of blood resting on his lips. When they observed this, they quickly staked his body, and he is claimed to have let out a blood-curdling scream as fresh blood shot out of his body. Number 5. The Gorbals Vampire. Back in 1954, the Gorbals district of Glasgow, Scotland, was shaken by a bizarre and terrifying story. People claimed there was a giant vampire lurking around, standing at a whopping 7 feet tall and sporting iron teeth. According to rumors, this vampire had even killed 2 young boys. The craziest part? Hundreds of school kids armed themselves with knives and wooden stakes and stormed the local cemetery to hunt down this vampire. Even the police couldn't stop them. They only backed off when heavy rain poured down, but they kept searching for the bloodsucker for the next couple of nights. The whole world caught wind of this story, and soon, Scotland was in the middle of a massive vampire scare. Some folks thought all this vampire talk stemmed from a popular American comic book at the time. So, in 1955, Parliament passed the Children and Young Persons Harmful Publications Act, aiming to ban comics that could be harmful to kids. Though it's unclear if the kids ever found the vampire, some of them still remember that wild night in the graveyard. One of them, Ronnie Sanderson, who's now grown up, says, "I was there. I was in the graveyard when I was 8 years old. I've been telling my wife about the vampire for years, and she's never believed me." Now, shifting gears a bit, let's talk about a book that added fuel to the vampire fire at that time. It's called The Treatise on the Apparitions of Spirits and on Vampires or Revenants of Hungary, and it hit shelves back in 1746. Written by a Benedictine monk named Anton Augustine Calmet, this book was like a deep dive into all things spooky, covering everything from angels and demons to witches and vampires. The work analyzed accounts of various topics from mythology and folklore, as well as the Bible and historically documented accounts. It was divided into 3 parts, the second of which contains 63 chapters, all dedicated to vampires and the undead. Number 6. Vlad the Impaler. Vlad Dracula was born in Romania's Transylvania. He intermittently controlled Romania's Wallachia between 1448 and 1477. He was a just but brutally terrible ruler who bravely repelled the Ottoman Empire, according to certain historians. His favorite method of eliminating opponents was by impaling them on a wooden stake, which gave rise to his nickname. Vlad Dracula was said to have delighted in eating with his dying victims and dipping his bread in their blood. It's unknown whether those graphic stories are real. Number 7. Mercy Brown. Mercy Brown may rival Count Dracula as the most notorious vampire. Many people think that Stoker was inspired by these tales to create Count Dracula, a Transylvanian who could only be killed by driving a stake into his victim's heart. Unlike Count Dracula, however, Mercy was a real person. She lived in Exeter, Rhode Island, and was the daughter of George Brown, a farmer. After George lost many family members in the late 1800s to tuberculosis, his community used Mercy as a scapegoat to explain their deaths. It was common at that time to blame several deaths in one family on the undead. The bodies of each dead family member were often exhumed and searched for signs of vampirism. When Mercy's body was exhumed and didn't display severe decay, not surprising since her body was placed in an above-ground vault during a New England winter, the townspeople accused her of being a vampire and making her family sick from her icy grave. They cut out her heart, burned it, then fed the ashes to her sick brother. Perhaps not surprisingly, he died shortly thereafter. Number 8. Peter Plogojowitz. A farmer named Peter Plogojowitz passed away in the Serbian village of Kisalava in 1725, but he didn't stay dead. Peter rose from the dead 3 days after his passing, showing up in front of his son and requesting food. It seems that the entire dying process increases appetite. After his son fed him, Peter went back the following night and asked for more food, but the child refused. Peter decided to part ways with his son, but not before glaring at him. The son was discovered dead the following morning, and 9 additional village residents were discovered deceased a few days later. All of these villagers complained of fatigue and seemed to have lost a lot of blood before they passed away. If you weren't already suspicious enough, they also claimed to be dreaming of Peter and his visits. So they went on to open Peter's grave. Everyone was astonished to discover that Peter's corpse was wonderfully preserved and that his mouth was covered in blood when they opened his grave. Following the finding, Peter's chest was pierced with a stake, causing blood to flow everywhere. Number 9. Nelly Vaughn. Just 19 years old, Nelly was buried in 1889 in West Greenwich, Rhode Island. Today, this so-called vampire is almost as famous as Mercy Brown, whose exhumation was covered by international newspapers. There has been a persistent myth for several decades that Nelly Vaughn, who is buried in West Greenwich, Rhode Island's Plain Meeting House Cemetery, was a vampire. People would claim that her grave was sinking into the earth and that no grass or other vegetation could grow over it. The words, "I am waiting and watching for you," found on Nelly's gravestone were interpreted as a menacing sign of vampire activity. Vaughn's cemetery has frequently been visited, vandalized, and her headstone broken. But in his book, Food for the Dead, folklorist and vampire scholar Michael Bell presents evidence, suggesting that Vaughn's is a case of mistaken identity and that her contemporaries never accused or exhumed her. The superstition probably arose in the last half-century or so and may be a result of confusion with Mercy, who died nearby at a similar date and age, and the admittedly creepy epitaph on Vaughn's tombstone, "I am waiting and watching for you." Number 10. Frederick Ransom. In the early 1800s, a man from a respected family in South Woodstock, Vermont, tragically died of tuberculosis while studying at Dartmouth College. His story became entangled with a wave of vampire panic that was spreading through rural communities at the time. In a desperate attempt to protect the rest of the family from the disease, the man's father took drastic measures. He had his son's body dug up and his heart burned in a blacksmith's forge. Sadly, this didn't stop the illness from claiming the lives of the young man's mother, sister, and 2 brothers. Decades later, the sole surviving brother, Daniel Ransom, shared the family's story. He revealed that there seemed to be a family history of tuberculosis. Despite this, Daniel lived much longer than expected, reaching over 80 years old. Number 11. Justina Yushkov. In mid-19th century Russia, peasants often blamed vampires for the spread of epidemics. It was thought that the first person to die of an epidemic was a vampire, and that the disease could only be stopped if the vampire was killed. During a cholera epidemic in one village in August 1848, a medical officer named Rupsov accused a dead pregnant girl named Justina Yushkov of being a vampire. When some peasants checked her corpse, they saw that her mouth was open, which they took as a sign that she was a vampire. The peasants then cut open Justina's body and discovered that her baby was missing. The child's body was found in Justina's coffin, and believing this to be definite proof that Justina was a vampire, the peasants drove a stake through her mouth. Although they were satisfied, this act disgusted a pastor in the region, and he reported the incident to a local district judge. Number 12. Mislata. The tale of Mislata, the herdsman of Blow, certainly sends chills down the spine. According to reports from city officials of the time, Mislata's undead presence haunted the town, calling out names and allegedly causing the death of those he recognized. The townspeople decided to exhume his body and drive a stake through his heart. However, despite their efforts, the horror persisted, with the undead Mislata returning to terrorize the villagers again. His mocking laughter and weird actions only intensified their fear and desperation. The villagers, in a state of extreme desperation, handed the vampire's lifeless body to an executioner who impaled it with many whitethorn stakes. He burned the vampire after transforming it into a pincushion. Everyone could hear the screams of the suffering undead, while the Blow vampire burned in the flames. As for whether these events truly occurred as described, it's a question that continues to spark debate. Number 13. Pyatomik. The story begins with the passing of a peasant named Pyatomich on April 9, 1923, as reported in newspapers of the time. After his death, his wife Khvija began experiencing disturbing visits from him during the night, claiming he appeared as a vampire, frightening the household. While some villagers doubted her tale, her sons confirmed it, sparking interest in the case. The vampire scare soon attracted attention beyond the village, prompting action. Following a traditional method, Pyatomic's sons and other villagers exhumed his grave, removed his body, and pierced it with a hawthorn stake. Number 14. Shalika Cullen.
A woman who thought she was a vampire from the movie Twilight has escaped jail for decapitating a mouse.
Famously known as Shalika Cullen, this woman's claims came to light when she decapitated a mouse and posted the whole graphic video on the internet. She was inspired by the movie Twilight and believed that she was also a vampire from the movie. But little did she know that Twilight was, in fact, just a movie and wasn't something to be inspired by. After she posted the video on the internet, her post was widely reported because of how graphic it was. She was even sent to court for this matter. However, she managed to stay out of jail somehow. The controversy was so bad that the journalists even had to ask her whether she drank human blood as well.
Is it true that you drink people's blood?
Don't make any.
She was also diagnosed with a personality disorder, and when interrogated, she said that it was her alter ego who did it all, and she had no control over it. Even though she didn't end up in jail, she was banned from keeping a pet for 2 years. Number 15. Countess Elizabeth Bathory de Exed. Chances are, even if you're not familiar with the name, you have heard tales of her fabled sadism. According to Guinness World Records, she was the most prolific female murderer ever. Bathory was a vampire, a torturer, a creature beyond humans who bathed in the blood of innocents to maintain her looks. As is typically the case, the truth behind the story is far more interesting. Elizabeth suffered from severe epileptic convulsions in her childhood, which led to weird cure claims about the Bathory vampire legend. One popular theory is that her seizures were cured by putting a non-sufferer's blood on her lips or using a piece of their skull, which fueled her insatiable bloodlust. Because of her bloodthirst, she is often characterized as a vampire, but she herself never claimed to be one. But once again, most of the people on this list never claimed to be one of those horrific creatures. Number 16. Sava Savanovich. The only thing scarier than vampires is ghosts. But imagine something scarier still, a ghost vampire. Say hello to Sava Savanovich. Sava was a Serbian vampire who lived in an old mill and fed on unwary travelers and millers who approached the mill after dark. Savanovich wasn't killed or driven off like most of the other bloodsuckers on this list. According to locals, he simply stopped attacking villagers. Meanwhile, the mill where he lived was passed down generation after generation, each new owner too scared to repair the building until it eventually collapsed. Now, locals report that he's awoken from his long slumber and roams the Serbian countryside, looking for a new home. And it's not just superstitious locals making these claims. The actual council themselves are the ones who put out the warning. Of course, it's probably a publicity stunt by the area's tourist board, we hope. And that was all for today. Let me know what you think about these so-called vampires in the comments below. I'll be back with more videos soon. See you in the next one. Goodbye.